Well, first of all, thank you, Sally and Randy, for having me here. I know it takes a lot to put these together, so certainly appreciate the logistics and the hosting, and I feel blessed to call you both dear friends. So thank you for that, and all the work we've done together over the number of years is still in me, so it's all good. Thank you. For the rest of you, thank you. It's dinner time if you're in Denver or Colorado, and I get that. So thanks for carving out a little bit of time in your day to be here. And my hope is that you will get at least one or two things that you can walk away from today's conversation and talk that you can try and experiment with your family, with your job, with your teams, wherever you go. So it's psychological safety is a core part of being a human being. So my hope is you'll get something. So get a piece of paper and write some stuff down as we go. And my hope is we'll interact. I'll talk a lot, but I'll try not to be the only one talking, which is never that much fun. So that's the plan. So based on that, let's see if I can share. And I will share. So are you seeing my screen, a black screen right now? Can you guys see my slides?
We're seeing the whole presentation, the whole PowerPoint went. Yep, now it's just a slide.
Okay, cool. All right, so before we get into the meat and potatoes of all of this, I want to talk a little bit. So the doctorate in me will have to give credit to the people that I have gone to school with and learned from. And so starting with Timothy Clark, he runs a company called Leader Factor, and he's a researcher, and he's also a doctor from Oxford University. And part of what we're going to talk about today is the 4 stages of psychological safety, and those come from Timothy Clark. And I've been through his class and his certification. So, a little bit of noise. You guys hear that? Somebody's running the blender. Okay, so if you're making Bloody Marys or margaritas, like, don't do it. Well, keep doing it. Just do the music. That's awesome. Cool. So the next person is Brene Brown. And I've had the good fortune to go through her boot camp, which is all about vulnerability and shame. And if you're familiar, she's the founder of Brave Leaders, Inc., and obviously a researcher around vulnerability and shame, and works out of Texas. The next person is Amy Edmondson, and she's been around since the 90s and doing psychological safety. She's an author. She wrote the book Fearless Organization. She has something called the Fearless Organization Scan, which is like a survey that you take to figure out the baseline of psychological safety in a team. And she's a Harvard Business School professor, so we'll bring some of her into here too. And then the last person that has really influenced me is David Rock, and he's a neuroscientist, runs something called the Neuro Leadership Institute. And I've had the good fortune to go through his work. And so how the brain reacts to threat is a key part of psychological safety. So thanks to those researchers and smart people, they have all been part of a little bit of this slide deck and also part of the workshop that I run. So what are we going to do? We're going to get into, so what is this thing called psychological safety? So what's the definition? What is that? Secondly, like, why do we care? Like, why does this matter today? And then the last part of the presentation, we're going to dig into these 4 stages, which is Tim Clark's stuff about inclusion, learner safety, contributor safety, and challenger safety. And we don't have time to unpack all of those in super detail, but we're going to have 1 or 2 things in each of those areas that hopefully are useful for you as you think about how can you create this in your team and in your life and in your home. And then we'll end with some Q&A. That's what we're going to do. All right, so let's start with first things first. What do you think psychological safety is? So I'm going to ask you, if you feel safe, like, come off mute and say it. If you don't, go ahead and put some stuff in chat. Like, just type in chat, like, what do you think it is? What have you heard? What do you think it is? We'll just take a couple minutes to kind of process that. And then maybe I'll ask Randy or Sally to read those out loud when they start coming in.
I would say where you don't feel that others are territorial
Okay.
or aggressive.
And I would also think just feeling safe to speak your mind without any kind of rebuff or,
Yep.
bullying type rebuff. I don't know.
Yeah, nice, Anna. Thank you. Sally, are you on mute?
Oh.
I am not helpful if I'm on mute.
You are helpful. I love you now. Come on.
So, the ability to speak freely without fear of shame, feeling like you won't be judged, having established trust. Someone said a management fad.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah. Anybody else? Those are great. So thank you for the stuff in chat and for Summer and Anna speaking up and so forth.
Yeah,
Anybody else?
The one thing I'll throw out, Karen, just real quick around that is feeling like you can raise a concern or a consideration. To me, that's one of the most potentially damaging aspects of not having psychological safety is somebody sees something but they're afraid to say something about it. And
yeah,
that dynamic is really dangerous.
right. Yeah, good. Thank you. Well, our researcher Tim Clark would say it's 5 words. It's an environment of rewarded vulnerability. So I think everything that you all said relates to that. So now I would ask you, what do you think that is? What is vulnerability to you? And the same things, maybe put some stuff in chat or come off mute. I'll tell you a little story for me. When I think of vulnerability, first thing that comes to my mind is, so we live in Colorado, there's a lot of meadows and so forth. And I think of like a deer in the middle of a meadow. And around the perimeter of the meadow, I can see like mountain lions. And if I'm like watching that, I get that sense of like, oh God, fight, flight, fear, right? Like, is the deer gonna die? Is the deer gonna run? Is the deer gonna freeze? Like, what's gonna happen? I just get that sense of, I'm not sure, and I feel very uncomfortable. And I would say the deer, to me, feels like it's in a very vulnerable space. So that's the emotion that comes up for me. What about some of the rest of you?
So I have memories of being in non-safe, psychologically safe environments where, you bring up ideas and you're dismissed, and only certain people are listened to, or, you don't feel like you can bring up anything that you have to say because it's not taken seriously.
Yeah, good. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else have a thought about what's vulnerability?
For a layperson in corporate organizations, vulnerability is job loss.
Yeah.
To me, vulnerability is about accepting the fact that I'm not perfect and putting it out there and not being worried about what others think about the fact that I'm not perfect. So this is who I am. Accept me as I am. If you don't, it's okay.
Love that. Thank you.
Along those lines, not being able to speak your mind, if there's a truth that's difficult and you feel you can't share it because of retribution, that's vulnerability.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, let's see what our friend Brene Brown has to say. So she's the researcher, and her core thing is vulnerability and shame. So I'm going to play this video. Tell me if you can hear it. Thank you.
We think about vulnerability as a dark emotion. You know, there are a lot of people who talk about positive emotions, negative emotions, dark emotions, light emotions. We think of vulnerability as a dark emotion. We think of it as the core of fear and shame and grief and disappointment, uncertainty, things that we do not want to feel, right? Things that I don't want to be vulnerable because that means I'm afraid. That means I'm uncertain. That means I'm at risk. I'm exposed. I'm in grief. So what we do is we armor up and we say, I do not want to slip into these dark emotions. I will not let myself be vulnerable. But here's what I learned from the research and certainly put into motion in my own life that was the most life-changing, is that vulnerability is the center of difficult emotion. But it's also the birthplace of every positive emotion that we need in our lives. Love, belonging, joy, empathy. How many of you would agree that we're in a serious empathy deficit in our culture today? Totally, right? No vulnerability, no empathy. In a culture where people are afraid to be vulnerable, you can't have empathy. You know, empathy is not a default response. If you share something with me that's difficult, in order for me to be truly empathic, I have to step into what you're feeling. And that's vulnerable. So there can be no empathy without vulnerability. Why do you think, in that example that I used a while ago, daughter comes home and says, you know, tears, no one sat with me at lunch today. They made fun of what I was wearing. So-and-so won't talk to me. They poured my books out of my locker. And the response back is, I told you, I bought you all those cute jeans. Why aren't you wearing those jeans? And pull your hair back. Is that an empathic response? No, it's a shaming response. Could that shaming response be at that? Could a mother who absolutely adores her child respond with that shaming response? Please say yes. Don't kid yourself. I mean, come on. If you're a parent sitting in here, then you sure as hell know the answer to that is yes. But why? Why did that happen? Where was the access to vulnerability? Where was empathy? You can't access empathy if you're not willing to be vulnerable. So if my daughter comes home and tells that to me, guess what I have to do? I have to reactivate that sweaty palmed 7th grader who lives inside me. And I have to go, oh God, that's so hard. I'm so sorry. That's happened to me. That's happened to me when I was in middle school, and it's happened to me last week. Let's talk about it. But you can't get there without vulnerability. You can't fake empathy. Innovation and creativity, born of vulnerability. This is my favorite part. I talked about this I did another TED Talk this year in Long Beach, and I told the story that during 2011 and even this year, after the big TEDx Houston talk went viral, the big calls came from Fortune 500 companies. Oh my God, we loved your TED Talk. It was great. Please come talk to all of our senior leaders. And it's like, okay, what do you want to talk about? Like, we don't care. Just come and talk to us. Just if you could ixnay the shame and vulnerability talk. Every single conversation, barring maybe 10%. I was like, well, what do you mean? Well, we love, you're funny. You have this great research. I think there's a real fit with what we do. We don't really do, that kind of stuff around here. So if you could not mention vulnerability and shame. So just for fun, for grins, I would say, okay, so what would you like me to talk about? Yeah, fourth quarter earnings, like freaking don't even balance my checkbook. Like, I'm not going to talk about that. So what do you want me to talk about? Well, the big issue, creativity and innovation. And change. We're going through a lot of change. Like, okay, so vulnerability is the birthplace of creativity, innovation, change. And the reason that crisis is happening is because you're not talking about vulnerability. Imagine creativity and innovation without vulnerability. I'm asking you for a work product that has never been made before, that's completely innovative. I need you to be creative, and I need you to present it to a group of people who are half of them are gonna think it's stupid and not understand it. No vulnerability there.
Okay, so she's awesome, right? And she just gets to the heart of it. So Tim Clark says an environment of rewarded vulnerability. We just talked about that. That's our definition. And now we're into, okay, so what is that? And Brene would say, it's the center of difficult emotion, right? Like, I don't know one of us that doesn't want love, belonging, and joy and empathy in our life. That's super important as humans. And the other part as companies is we need innovation and creativity. Like, and so there we go. So I want to talk a little bit about, so what's driving this? Like somebody brought up, this is the latest management fad, right? And it's like, so I hear you. And I also want to support that that might not be the case. We might be in a different place this time. So two big things are really driving this concept of psychological safety. Kind of two pillars, I'd say. So on the left side is this concept of social injustice. And with what's happening in the United States after George Floyd and a lot of the things that have happened with Democrat and Republican and all of that, we have a lot of initiatives going on around diversity, equality, and inclusion. And I don't know any company that I'm working with right now where the CEO doesn't have that on their radar and how important that is. So the moral force driving this is one of the key things. On the other side, it relates to the other thing that Brene said is competitiveness, marketness forces are all about innovation and creativity. And if you show up at work and you bring your best self to work and you feel safe to challenge the status quo and get in there and do things and look at things in a different way, you are the secret sauce for that company. Because everything else anymore, from technology to globalization and all of that, that's sort of baseline for a lot of companies. Everybody's doing that. It's now the people. It's the people that make the difference. And if they show up and they feel safe and they feel like they can actually look at the things that we've always done a certain way and say, guess what, I have a different idea. I think I might be able to do it better. And we embrace that. Now that's a secret weapon. Now that company starts to become really powerful and really competitive. So psychological safety driven by an environment of rewarded vulnerability brings these two things to the surface: social injustice and market competitiveness. So that's why I think it might not be a flash in the pan. It might be real. And for me personally, Randy kind of was going through a little bit of my history. I've been in corporate America for 35 years. And I look back at my career and some of the things that companies I worked at. And I do believe, just on my one little data sample, this is the difference right here. We had a lot of automation. We had a lot of globalization. I worked at Hewlett Packard. At one point, we had 320,000 employees in 120 countries, and we were all about everywhere, all the place, all the time. But it was really, more than anything, it was the people. And I think we know it, but we haven't really embraced it. So these are the two things that are kind of behind, that are driving this. So let's get into a little bit more before we get into the model of the 4 stages. I want to talk about how we as people are constantly assessing that environment, this vulnerable environment. Is it safe? Is it not safe? Every time you walk into a meeting, whether you know it or not, you're looking and you're evaluating, am I in what I would call the red zone or the defensive zone, or am I in the blue zone, kind of the more open, offensive, engaged zone? Because the minute I feel triggered and the minute I feel excluded, or I'm not valued, or I'm not important, or I'm shut down, my brain goes into that pain center of my brain, which is that social part of emotional pain that we talked about. And I'm either in the fight, flight, or freeze mode, right? And if I'm in the fight mode in a meeting, I'm defensive and I push back. If I'm in the flight mode, I just want to leave and get out of the meeting. If I'm in the freeze mode, I say nothing and I shrink back. I don't know about you, but I've done every one of those in meetings and I've been triggered. So when you go into that red zone where it's unsafe, now you're in this like self-preserve mode, where I would call it the amygdala or the core part of your brain. That's the oldest part of your brain, which is responsible for your emotions, the fight, flight, or freeze. Once that's triggered, this new part at the front called the executive process has now gone offline, because now I'm in the mode of, holy cow, how do I preserve risk management and shrink back and get out of here and somehow stay away from what I would call the tiger. And I love this picture of the tiger. I had to bring this. This is a new part of this presentation because it creates that emotion for me where if you're in that meeting, no person comes up with a good idea when they're feeling like they're being chased by a tiger, right? It's just not happening. It's not physically possible for our brains to do that. So keep this thought in mind as we go through this concept of safe, unsafe. Am I vulnerable or not vulnerable? Am I going to be rewarded or punished for my behavior? Because that's the core. And if I'm rewarded, I'm in that innovation and that creativity mode. And if I'm punished, I'm in that fight, flight, freeze mode, and I'm shrinking back. Okay, so here's the model, and I want to kind of just go over it real quick before we dig into the 4 stages, but I want to talk about the X and the Y axes. So on the X axis, we have permission, and on the Y, we have respect. And if I go all the way to the right on the X axis under permission, and I have very low respect, I'm in this section or this area called exploitation. Let me give you an example. Let's pretend Randy works for me. Actually, no, let's pretend Sally works for me for a second. I'm going to use Randy as the other option. Let's just pretend. And Sally is a great worker. She can crank it out. She can get stuff done. And I love that about her. I don't know where she lives. I don't know if she's married. I don't know if she has kids. I don't know what her hobbies are. I don't know any of that. And I don't actually really care. All I really care about is that she gets stuff done. So I give her a lot of permission. I give her a lot of autonomy. I give her a ton of work. And I don't care if she works on weekends, holidays, after hours, like that, I don't care. And when she's like, hey, I need some time off, I'll be like, well, we still have deadlines and deliverables. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Thank you. I'm exploiting her. That's an example of low respect, a lot of exploitation, and a lot of permission. So let's do the other one. Let's go up the Y-axis, the respect. And now let's pretend that Randy works for me. So here's what's going on there. I'm giving Randy, I adore Randy, and I know that he likes baseball. He likes baseball cards. He likes karaoke. I know where he lives. I know that he just came back from Hawaii. I know a ton of stuff about him. I think he's an amazing human being, and I love that. And I give him no opportunities to grow. I am like a helicopter parent with him. He gets 1 or 2 things here or there, and I am all over him. Like I give him very little permission, but I totally love him. I'm super respectful of him as a human. So these are the examples of paternalism and exploitation. And our goal is to go up the middle of this. And so the extremes are not good, right? We want to have inclusion, learner, contributor, and challenger safety where we are balanced with respect and permission as we grow. So that's our model. And I just wanted to kind of explain the extremes before we dig into the 4 stages. Is everybody with me? You guys tracking with me? Okay, cool. All right. So I'm going to ask somebody, Jeff, with the super nice beard. Will you do me a favor? Would you be willing to read the definition of inclusion safety for us?
Absolutely. Inclusion safety is the basic human need to be included, accepted, and belong. You are accepted for who you are, including your unique attributes and defining characteristics.
Thank you. So the definition is like you're valued as a human. And we talked a little earlier about if you've ever been excluded, like, what does that feel like? You know, it's like you're involved and all of a sudden you're not, or you're not one of the in group, or you're not invited to that meeting, or you thought you had friends and all of a sudden you go out and they're all at a bar and they didn't invite you. It's like, what's happening? Like, why am I not part of that? So this concept of being excluded is it. I'm going to keep going, but normally I would stop and say, does anybody have a story? But I want to be respectful of time. But one of the things about social rejection is that you can't see it. It's different. Like with physical pain, if I broke my leg, right, I could get a cast and I could use ice and I could take some painkillers and maybe feel better. If I'm socially rejected, it's an emotional thing that I like to use the term like it's a bullet ricocheting around in my brain and I can't get it out. And a lot of times things come out in ways that maybe are not the most professional or what you would be proud of. I certainly have done that. I know that I have. Because when you feel rejected, when you don't feel loved and valued and included, like Brene said, it's very easy to feel like, okay, how am I going to handle this? And this is a big deal as far as inclusion. So one of the things about inclusion safety in stage 1 is that because we're all here on this planet as humans, and as long as we're not hurting somebody, you are valued. It's not something you have to earn. You as a person matter. And when you're at work, you should be included. And I'm not talking about skills and that kind of thing. I'm talking about valued as a person. When you walk into the building, you're valued as a human. So the question is, why do we not do that? So when we judge other people, we're judging them based on our view of their perceived worthiness. And I would call this myths of superiority, stereotypes, biases, and we all have them. They come with the way we were raised, they come with the gender that we are, they come with the location that we grew up. There's a whole bunch of them: social, physical, people that are fat, people that are thin, people from different ethnic backgrounds, men, women, political, Democrat, Republican, independent, you name it, religious, different levels of education, different economic statuses, old and young. We have a lot of bias around old people don't understand technology. Young people do. I don't know if that's true, but maybe we do that. Occupation, oh, doctors are this way, lawyers are that way. You know, VPs and C-level people do this and so forth. You know, geographic. I mean, even in the United States. Oh, so you're from the Midwest. Oh, you're West Coast, you're East Coast. Oh, you live in the South. It's like we have a bias across the board for almost, you know, a lot of things. And this is key to inclusion. So one of the things is, as we get to the next step here is, so how do I create this? Now that we know that we have it and how important it is to feel included, how do we create it? So this is where you can, there's a couple things I'm going to share with you, and this is not the deep dive into all of it, but you may have other thoughts. But my first thing I would say is identify and try to stop perpetuating those theories of superiority. Think about your own. If you think about, I'll give you, the slides. It's like, do you do that? Do you have a bias around where people are from or what gender? From a gender standpoint, do you expect women to manage the household versus men? Or do you expect men to be more mechanically inclined than women? Think through that. What's that, AJ?
Nothing.
Okay. So this is key, because this affects us when we go to work. If you're all leaders and you're managing teams and people, or you're part of teams, it's easy to just do this unconsciously. So think about it. That's the first thing you might want to put on your notes, is how might you inspect your own biases? Second thing I would suggest is engage in behaviors where you ask, invite, and share. So this seems kind of obvious, but now that everybody's at home and everywhere, asking people to be part of things, including everybody. Let's say we're doing the Friday, coffee together, or a book club, or lunch, or whatever. Ask people, I'd like you to come. I'd like you to invite people to that, and don't exclude people. Ask people about, how are you as a person? Randy, how was your weekend? How was your trip to Hawaii? Let's connect on that level, those kind of things. And then the next thing is share. So from my perspective, hey, I got a new bike. I'm really proud of it. I like to get out and ride. It's just, these are things that we need as people to feel included. And a team that does this on a consistent basis develops this norm of inclusion. And then that becomes the culture of that team. And it breeds success. And so one team can bleed over into another team, and it's like a tidal wave, right? Pretty soon you've got a bunch of teams doing this. So this is super impactful and really important. Okay, so that's inclusion. I'm going to keep us moving. So now we're moving into learner. So that's the next stage on our 4-stage model. And I'm going to ask AJ, I don't think you're on mute. So would you read the definition for me?
Yeah, if I can somehow control it. Okay. Learner safety satisfies the basic human need to learn and grow. You feel safe in the learning process, asking questions, giving and receiving feedback, experimenting, and even making mistakes.
Nice. Thank you. So naturally, once you feel included, the normal human thing is to learn and to grow. So I put this on here because I want to share a quick little story. I don't know if you've had somebody ever in your life, a mentor, a coach, a manager. I've had a teacher that really had more confidence in me than I had in myself. And they had this ability to really separate this concept of, oh, I'm going to make a mistake and there's going to be failure. And they said, no, it's all about learning. And I really felt proud of moving through the process, and the concept of not feeling silly or awkward because this person believed in me. My guess is each of you probably somewhere in your life have had somebody that really, really helped you feel included and safe to learn. And that's a key component of this. So one of the things is learning is intellectual and emotional. Since we talked about inclusion and the physical pain, and then we talked about social pain, if you're not feeling safe to learn, you go into that defensive sort of red zone state. And now we're back to that amygdala where you're in that fight, flight, freeze zone. And your ability to learn new things is now impaired because you're focused on risk management and how you can figure out how to take care of you personally versus trying to put yourself into a situation where you might feel a little awkward and a little uncomfortable. So this is super important. These two things are key because learning requires emotion and a safe kind of blue zone state in order for you to actually really engage and dig into that. So we need both. So how do you do that? First thing, all of you can do this for your family, for your friends, for your spouse, for people in your team, is try to help people disconnect that fear of failure. As adults, we are so consumed with looking like we know what we're doing and not to be perceived as not smart or whatever. And the minute you start feeling sort of afraid and awkward, that's actually a trigger that in your brain, you're developing new pathways, which means you're learning and you're growing. And as long as you have some support from others, it feels safe. So you can each model the way to say, you know, I don't know how to do this either. Now, let me give you an example. If we're in a team meeting, and let's pretend that Sally's our boss, and it's Sally, Karen, Randy, and Jeff, and we're in a team. And there's a new thing that I want to learn. And I volunteer and say, you know, I'd like to try that. I feel like safe with this group. I feel included. And I look over at Sally and I say, I might need some help. I don't know exactly how to do this. And if she says, you know what? I don't know how to do that either, but we can learn together. Or she could say, you know what? I don't know how to do that either. Thank you for volunteering. And Randy knows how to do that. And I'll compare you and Randy up with that. And you guys can work together and he can help mentor and coach and guide you. If that happens in that meeting, I can tell you that all of a sudden I feel valued, I feel included, and I've seen her model the way. I've seen her say, you know what, I don't know either, but we can figure this out. So that's one opportunity that we can each do. Encourage team members during the learning process, right? So we talked about how important it was for my teacher to encourage me. Same thing for all of you. It seems obvious, and none of us, I shouldn't say none of us, but a lot of times we don't do it. So as you're taking some notes, think about how might you do that this week? How might you do that tonight or tomorrow or this weekend or next week? How can you help? How can you model the way? And how can you encourage others? So the last thing here is, from a coaching spectrum, we have these two ends. We have kind of ask and we have tell, right? And at the beginning of the learning process, you may need to tell more to provide more guidance. But as people begin to grow and learn, you can start asking more open-ended questions. For example, if Sally's the boss and she says, well, how might you try that, Karen? How could you possibly look at something from a different perspective? At the beginning of the process, she can say, here's how, and show me, which is much more telling. But as I learn and as I grow, she starts to transfer what we call critical thinking and ownership to me, which is another way that we really learn. So now I'm starting to say, oh, I have some ideas and here's what I'm going to try. And she provides some guidance. So we're going up the middle of the model again. We're staying out of paternalism and exploitation, and we're providing guidance and support as we learn. So these are some things you can try. All right, now we're moving to stage 3. So let's see. Who else? Anybody? How about Kathy? Are you open to coming off mute and reading the definition of contributor safety? I'm just playing Hollywood squares because I can't see you guys. She's like, I'm off making Bloody Marys. All right, Sally, how about you? Will you read it for me? If you come off mute.
I can read it. I had to turn on mute when I was making my own margaritas.
Oh, good. Okay. Thanks for letting me know that.
Contributor safety satisfies the basic human need to make a difference. You feel safe to use your skills and abilities to offer a meaningful contribution.
Thank you. That just feels good to have you read that. Like, who doesn't want to? Now that we have inclusion, we feel valued as a human. And now we've moved up to I want to learn. I want to try new things. And now I'm at this stage of, now I want to +1 things. Now I see things like, I think I can try something different, and I want to, include and learn new things and contribute in a different way. So this is logical progression. So what's different about this, and I want to bring this up, than inclusion, is that this is autonomy with guidance in exchange for results. And so it's different than inclusion safety because you earn it. It's not owed to you. So you have to be accountable and you have to have skill at this level. You have to have learned and shown that, you know what, I can contribute. And therefore, then you get this opportunity. So here's another example. I used to play college basketball and I used to practice all the time. And I was, on the bench for probably the first year or two. And pretty soon I got tapped on the shoulder to be like, guess what? You're great at free throws, you're great at defense, and you've got a good 3-point shot. We believe in you. You can contribute. Get in the game. Now things have changed because I'm included as a person. I've learned how to do the plays. I know how to do some of the stuff that's happening on the court. And now I'm in the game and now I'm contributing. So that's an example of I earned it. I didn't just show up and get thrown in there. So back to our two extremes. Again, if your skill grows, and this happens a lot in Agile transformations, and that's why I kind of want to bring this up, is that as your skills grow, and maybe you're going through and you're going from waterfall, or you're going from a traditional organizational structure where you have management and they're the kind of the centerpiece of everything. And now you have Scrum Masters and product owners and Scrum teams and all that stuff. And the manager's starting to feel left out. What's my role? How come nobody's checking in with me? I used to be important and powerful and in the middle. And so now all of a sudden I become that helicopter parent we were talking about earlier, where I'm like, yeah, you need to check in with me. I need to see all the details of everything. I'm not sure you guys are like, I don't really know what this Agile thing is. Like, it seems like you guys just don't have any accountability. All of a sudden these things start coming up, right? And that can really, really squelch people. So it's an important thing to watch for, because paternalism happens when people are, I like you, but I'm not comfortable giving you more tasks to do. And a lot of that comes from their own ego and their own trigger and their own feeling, I'm not included and I'm not valued. So this model applies to everybody. So there might be ways to be able to bring that manager along and help them out. Okay, so how do we do this? How do we create contributor safety? First thing, this is a bigger thing now. Explain the why, right? Why are we doing this? What is this big initiative? And so people have a better understanding of background of things. It's not just, hey, go do it. It's like, this is how this contributes to the company at this level. And then based on skill and desire, people get assigned the work. I raised my hand, or I got in the game, that kind of thing. And then delegate the work. Let it go. Let the individual inspect, adapt, and try. Now, this doesn't mean abandonment, right? So you can get into things and you can be like, yeah, I have to go back to learner stage. I need more tell than I need ask. And that's okay. This is a kind of an up and down this 4-stage model. But the intent here would be to transfer ownership and empower the individual at this contributor level. So when I get in the game and I get the ball, it's my job to bring the ball down the court. It's my job to set up the plays. And I'm in charge of that role. And the ownership is mine. Now, if I get a bunch of fouls or I lose the ball, it doesn't mean that you can't take me out of the game, and I can't work on that skill again and get better at it and then get back in the game. It applies to business just like it would to sports. Okay, now we're coming down the home stretch here. Challenger, and this is where Brene Brown would say innovation and creativity happens. And this is where we talked about the 2 reasons why this is so important: social injustice and market competitiveness. Now we're at that phase of stage 4. So Randy, are you open to reading this one for me?
Assuming I can aim and unmute. Challenger safety satisfies the basic human need to make things better. You feel safe to speak up and challenge the status quo when you think there is a need or opportunity to improve.
Awesome.
I could think of some scenarios where that might be useful.
Yeah, right. So now that you're included and you've learned and now you've contributed, now you're at that stage where you're like, you know what? We've done this for 25 years that way. And if Randy's my boss and he created the process for the 25 years, I get to show up at work and say, guess what, boss? Is it okay if we talk about doing that different? That's what we're talking about. So challenger safety is really like divergent thinking, dissent, tolerance for candor, what I'd call creative tension. Now, the key thing about this level of psychological safety is it is the highest of the vulnerable stages. You are the most vulnerable when you challenge the status quo. So in order for this to work, you have to have what I like to call air cover in exchange for candor. So because if you challenge the status quo, and in this case, if I challenge Randy and if Randy says, you know what, Karen, thanks for your input, but let's take that offline. Or you know what, Karen, you always bring up the negative side of everything. And that process has been working for 25 years. And so you probably don't know what you're talking about. These are extreme examples, right? But I'm shut down now, right? First of all, if he asked me to come talk to him alone, like I'm totally triggered. It's the fight, flight, freeze thing. I'm like, this is not going to go well. And if he says, you know, it's been working for 25 years and you're always negative, I'm right there too. I'm like shrinking right back because now I'm in the red zone and I'm back to that flow chart where it's like, all I care about is protecting and risk management. So given the time, I'm going to keep going, but normally I would say, what's happened when you've challenged the status quo? And I've had some people actually say, it's been great, which is cool, because I don't want to think that it's always not good. There's lots of really good companies and great teams, you know, but there are some stuff where it's not, and that can be very complicated and difficult. So how do we do this? How do we create challenger safety? So I have this picture on the right side over here. It says intellectual friction and social friction. And I have our little model here of threat detection, right? Safe, not safe. Am I okay? Blue zone. Am I bad? Red zone kind of thing. So intellectual friction and social friction. So the key thing here, what does that mean? Is that the goal is you want to focus on the problem. You come to a meeting and the idea is it's not about the people. Try to stay away from emotionally triggered and loaded words that might be like, yeah, that's a dumb thing. You know, why would you say something like that? Oh, you're always negative. Why do you bring that up? Those are triggers. And those are things that are going to create emotions in the person that's going to put us in the red zone. So the intent is let's focus on the problem and let's minimize and decrease the social friction, the sensitive emotional pieces of it. This is hard. Because if Randy has this process that he's had for 25 years, and he might be super proud of it, and I start saying, hey, I see it differently. I want to go in a different direction for these reasons. And he's like, ugh, you know, it takes somebody that has a bit of a control of their ego, somewhat of humility, and the ability to accommodate different views. This is not easy. So how do you do that? So first thing I would say is let's make a process out of it. Instead of saying, Karen, you just be brave and you speak up, you know, it might be like, let's create a process where coming up with objections, seeing it different, opposition is part of it. So it takes away some of that vulnerability or the red zone of the one person. And I've put a couple things in here like loyal opposition, devil's advocate. I'm sure you've got others. I even brought in something from Salesforce. Some of you may be familiar. It's called V2MOM. Vision, values, methods, obstacles, and measures. And the obstacles is the key part here to say it's part of the process and it's fine. You're supposed to bring up obstacles. So that makes it safe for the person. And then I would say create working agreements. And we talked about air cover. And so the idea of what is that? And in our little make-believe group we've been talking about here is we could define that. So that would be, and in this case, if Randy's the boss and we have this working agreement, it's like, so if he says, no, that's stupid, or if he says, let's take it offline, the rest of us have agreed, we have a certain set of rules that say, that's not okay. And we're actually going to throw a flag on the play because we agreed as a team that those were our agreements. So it takes some courage to speak up, but if you have an agreement and you've agreed together, it makes it easier to be the person that says, I see it differently. So there's a couple things you can do if you're writing on your notes here to say, okay, I'm going to try that. I'm going to give that a shot. So we're at the end of the 4 stages. And I just have something I want to share from a poll that I did from a very large group that I presented this to, where the first thing I asked is, in a team setting, which of the 4 activities do most team members want to do first? And it's like 82%, like overwhelming, want to connect, which is inclusion safety. The other question I ask is, in a team setting, which of these 4 is the highest risk? Almost 90% are like challenge the status quo, right? So that just reinforces what we've been talking about is you've got to include people. You've got to encourage people to learn. You've got to allow people to actually contribute. And then once you've got to that spot, create some kind of working agreement, some kind of overarching, what is air cover, to challenge the status quo. And the more you do this, it becomes the norm of inclusion and psychological safety for that team. So I'm going to end with the single most important thing you can do in a culture transformation is model the way. It's the behavior the leader models. So if the leader's doing inclusion, learner, contributor, and challenger safety, that's modeling the way. If you're not modeling the way, you're part of it. You're part of the problem. You're getting in the way. So we all own that. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions. I have one slide at the end, which is just if anybody's interested in workshops and so forth, but we won't get into that, and you can have the deck. So sorry for all the talking. Normally I have more interaction, but I just feel like we're running out of time and I want to give you guys your time to do your networking and all that. So I can stop sharing.
Well, you've done so much art at home. I'll say show her your spaceship or like.
Do you have the ability to mute?
I just did that.
Thank you.
I couldn't figure out who it was for a while there. So does anyone have questions for Karen or things you want to discuss? I mean, I know this hits home for me. Karen, one thing that I was thinking about was, I mean, certainly as a leader, trying to focus on these things, how can you try to bring these things in if you're not a leader, or how can you coach people to do that if you aren't necessarily at that leadership level?
Yeah. Yep. I think you start where you are. I mean, we always say leadership sort of from every seat. And I think it's a chronological process, like just begin at the inclusion level and maybe try, to incorporate inviting people and challenging your own bias and kind of doing that, and then at the learner level, how can you encourage others within your group? Even if you're not the leader of the team, we can all do that. And the contributor level is the next step, which is really like, as you learn, you're helping people along the way to add more and +1 things, and then try challenging, do an experiment, ask about, could we create a working agreement about how we might challenge the status quo? I think anybody can do that. I realize that, it's easier if the leader is doing it, but you're a leader, we all are. I believe that.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, I'm currently working in a company that immediately established that psychological safety by inclusion and contributing. Like, if someone needed help, anybody would just raise their hand and say, okay, I'll help. you know, and it
Yes.
does, it creates the environment for everybody.
Yeah, you model the way, right? So that's a great example of, saying, I can help.
Yeah.
I want to be part of that. So
And the more people that do it, the more it does become the culture.
that's right.
Mhm.
Good point.
Yeah.
I'm curious, and I'm gonna pick on an attendee just because I know that we all can benefit from the great depth of experience and perspective that they bring. And yes, Jeff, I'm talking about you. Jeff, I would love to hear your take on anything about this topic.
Well, I'm really believe that, establishing psychological safety exists, right? Where I'm frankly really skeptical of is, frankly, where it comes from, and whether psychological safety can ever come from a system, particularly an organizational system. And I'll have to admit that my first thinking of this, when I first saw this, is when the New York Times published a long article about the research Google was doing in the realm of psychological safety, almost at the same time that Google fired the members of their ethical AI lab when they started publishing things that were critical of the things Google was doing with AI. And on one hand, if you read the Google article, that was really serious stuff, and they had really learned some stuff. But when the chips were down, the people in the ethical AI lab were not safe. And where psychological safety comes from, the one that's really going to be useful, I think, for you as an individual, as a person, is stuff that comes from individual exploration and practice. And I say that because the real big changes, if you want to talk about social justice, the real big changes in this country and in other countries have come from nonviolent social action, which is a group of people willing to put their own safety secondary to something they were standing for. And in business, I look at the real big shifts, right? Didn't emerge. Steve Jobs didn't create an environment of psychological safety, and he didn't live in one either, right? I can say the same thing how the American auto industry emerged. That was definitely not a psychologically safe industry in the early going. And so that's why I just find myself really skeptical of whether psychological safety can ever really come from a system in a way that an individual could really trust it. And if you want to experience psychological safety, that's got to come from inside.
Look at Jeff challenging this status quo, challenger safety.
Good one.
I'm not challenging the existence of the need for psychological safety. I'm just questioning where it needs to come from if you're really going to live resiliently with it.
Yeah. Well, I think that is like back to what we ended with is it starts with us. It does take courage. It takes some guts to say, that's my best friend, and he or she just made fun of somebody of minority or a different gender, and I'm going to call them on it. And that's what I would call allyship. And that's the beginning of inclusion. And that's the beginning of developing safety. And you're right, Jeff, I think it's a human thing. It takes courage and guts to do that.
I think this is Anna. I think it's easier to maybe do it within a team of smaller people, to speak up versus an overall organization. I mean, I feel pretty safe within my team of like 7 people. But at an organizational level, I've also seen where you're on the one hand invited to speak up, but depending on, I guess, the temperature in the room, they only want you to speak up so much, and then they really don't want you to speak up. So it's kind of interesting to see how myself I would fit in, to some of that, because I can definitely see where in some scenarios I would be in that, flight, freeze, fight, response, and in other scenarios I feel safe. So it really depends.
Does Anne have a question?
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Yeah, I had a comment. I guess it comes back. It's similar to what Anna just said, but I was kind of questioning, as concerning Jeff's point, whether it would be perhaps easier in a startup to create this psychological safety versus a mega corporation, which already has an overarching, very strong culture, unless the CEO and the executives at the top really promote this culture of safety, psychological safety, then perhaps, it would be very difficult for an individual to really kind of, have this impact on the organization. But I think you did bring it up, Karen, that indeed, you start with yourself and then you start with your team if you do have an impact on your team. Just my comment.
Hi, this is Vishal. So we talked about creating psychological safe environment. It will be easy at a product organization, right? And then we are saying at team level, and then at mega organizational level, right? So here is the thing. Let's take a step forward. We can see across the industry, we have a lot of multi-vendor composition into teams, right? At a portfolio level, at any level, right? So with this multi-vendor composition, this is more crucial, and the level of implementing this psychological safety, that difficulty really exploits when you have multi-vendor, when you have offshore vendors taking along everybody, because innovation will happen at roots, right? It will happen at the grassroots level. If you have your 70% of team members contributing from vendor side, and if you don't take them along with a psychological safety, then forget about innovation, then forget about excelling, right? As Karen very correctly mentioned during the course, that every organization will be doing the geographical distribution, running 24/7 teams, right? Then automation, cloud, transformations. However, to have that particular edge, you have to have build this particular psychological safety, so that people will not feel vulnerable. They will bring their ideas, and those ideas, once you have that culture built up, then you will have an edge in the market. Okay. Few my 2 cents on that.
Yeah. Thank you. Like,
Kim, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. So my question is, I guess I see the benefit of starting with the individual, and I'm thinking of a particular customer I'm working with right now, where it is a very unsafe organization of several thousand. So at the team level, there is really no safety even within the team, because there's so much micromanaging and oversight. So that makes me think about, how do we start getting the leaders, whether they're mid-level or C-level or whatnot, helping them understand the why of this, helping them make that shift when they don't see the benefit of this?
Well, I think that question goes right to what I was going to say. And my intent wasn't to answer your question, but it dovetails with what I was going to jump in with, which is I think as coaches, really it's our job to hold the mirror up and reflect that back, right? And to say, to have the conversation around what's important to your effectiveness as an organization. Invite, kind of the reflection and inspection of the environment through that lens, and sort of put it out there for them to reflect on, and either they look at that and go, yeah, that's right, we need to change, or they say, nope, we're fine. And either way, you have your answer, right?
Well, yeah, I'm actually starting to wonder now whether maybe, and I need to reflect on this, but maybe it could be, if you're thinking of Laloux's reinventing organizations, it could be a level of consciousness of the leader, or maybe an EQ level of the leader, that they're just not at a place where they can hear it, right? They do want the faster time to market. They want the innovation, or else their competitor's going to win the market and they're going to go out of business. And so it's like this yes, but going on within them.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I was curious for Karen.
You know what? I just have one comment too on this, Kim, and I love the question. So one thing sometimes I want to defend those leaders that are the pain in the ass, because they're people and they're doing it. All of us are innately, insecure, and there's fear in that leader. And when he or she shows up and is lacking what he or she perceives as control, the question I would have for us as coaches and other leaders is, where can we create love and empathy and inclusion for that leader? How can we help that leader feel safe to be able to say, I don't know, and I'm concerned, and I want to win in the marketplace, and I don't know how to get to challenging what we've always done, because that makes me super uncomfortable. So the question is, how do we have empathy and love and connectedness for that person that's the pain in the ass? It's like, because that's the core, that's the source of the problem. And how do we connect with them and say, tell me where it hurts? How can we have a relationship where they feel heard and they feel included and they feel valued?
Thank you for that, Karen. And also, just to clarify, I was not meaning to judge leaders or say that a certain level of consciousness is better than another, or a certain EQ is better than another. It's more of maybe an acceptance on our part as coaches, to accept where they're at, and support them where they are at, versus trying to push them to be where they're not ready to go.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that, Kim.
I like your addition. You said it much more eloquently, right? How can we help provide that safe space for them? And I appreciate that. Super helpful. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
So I am going to start. I'm going to share the first question that was ever asked in the chat. Alex has a question, and he says he has loud children, so he can't come off mute, which I'm sure many of us empathize with. So Alex asked, for contributor safety in a career environment, we hire someone to be effective basically on day one. We empower them to make a difference. Us hiring them is them earning it. To make sure I'm understanding it, is earning it only applicable when someone wants to contribute beyond their role?
I guess it depends. But I do think you have to feel safe and included. This is a chronology thing, and contributor safety. People need space to learn. And you are so right. Like, inevitably, we're like, we hired you, or how about this? This is even a better scenario. We're going to send you to a class. And back when I worked at HP, I was a COBOL programmer, and I had to learn how to like manage, like they had MPE Unix servers and this other stuff. So I went to class to learn how to program these Unix servers. And I came back, it was a 3-day class. And when I got back, I was supposed to know how to do it. Are you kidding? Like I was like a deer in the headlights. And so that's such a fallacy. Once we get out of college, where we spent all our time learning and focused on books and all of that, now we get into the workplace and we go to like a class and we like supposed to come back to work and be like, hit the ground running. That's unrealistic. And I feel like that's a real opportunity for us to be able to say, I need a mentor, I need a buddy, I need somebody who will coach me and help me along the way and help me learn. And then when I feel like I can contribute, it doesn't have to be in your area. Normally it is, but you get a certain level of confidence and skill where you might be able to contribute in different areas that are outside of your immediate space, if I understood your question. But it gets me going because it's such an interesting thing that happens in most companies about training and learning. And it's like, you got it. You went to class. Get going. It's like, okay, I'm really panicking. So I don't know if I addressed your question correctly. Perhaps you can ask it again, or we can go back over it, but.
Let's see, Ken has a question. Hey, Ken.
Yeah, I want to thank Jeff because he got me thinking. You know, I think psychological safety may have a place in certain areas or certain stages, maybe of your company or your business's growth cycle. Visionary really is not compromising on that vision, right? So how much value do you place in psychological safety in that stage? And I think a lot about when I have conversations about command and control. Command and control has existed for so long because it works. That's controversial, but it works for a short time before you're leaving a trail of dead bodies in your wake, and then you can no longer scale, right? So at some point in your business or company's progression, if you want to scale, if you want to grow, if you want to get you want to benefit from the diversity of ideas, that's where the psychological safety really helps to propel that company. But there's a lot of nuance. And, you know, I think one thing I wrote is that environment of rewarded vulnerability.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What does rewarded mean? Does it always mean that my ideas are always, you know, either accepted, acknowledged? No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that rewarded vulnerability is that it's, maybe not in the case of Google. I know the Aristotle project probably was, you know, kind of contradicted their own actions, but, you know, maybe don't get fired. Maybe that's a reward. I don't know. So there's a lot I'm trying to think about, you know, and you know, again, thanking Jeff to kind of help me think about through some of these deeper levels of what psychological safety really means and where it's a benefit. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Were you going to say something, Randy?
I was typing instead, but yeah, I was saying just feeling heard might be the reward.
Some might be, if you argue with me, that's the reward. You know, if you debate what I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, feeling heard and respected.
Yeah, the smallest practice that we can embrace is be a good listener for our teams. Yeah. Giving them a psychological safety at first place.
I definitely want to be cognizant of the clock, but I'm reticent to try and shut things down. This has been like a truly impactful, you know, very highly reflective, certainly for me, and I really valued the dialogue and the different perspectives. This has been a fantastic session.
Completely echo that.
Great, Karen. Thank you.
Oh, well, you guys are great. Thank you for having me and just for the dialogue and for caring about this. It's like, I love it. I think it's important, and I'm not sure exactly where everything's going to go in the world, but I can tell you one thing that also is happening is this great resignation, right? I think things are different. I think life is different after COVID. And I think without psychological safety, there's countries like Australia, New Zealand, and Canada that are incorporating this into things like ISO standards and Department of Health things. And it's like, I don't think it's going away. I think this one's here to stay, but that's what I'm hopeful for. Let's put it that way.
Same.
Yeah.
We're all here to carry the torch,
Mhm.
build psychological safety, coach people on how to build psychological safety. Okay, well, Karen, thank you so much.
Yes.
Wonderful. I mean, great presentation, but then this has been such an engaged group. Thank you everyone for joining in the conversation and asking great questions and all of that. So
yeah.
Thank you so much for such a awesome learning opportunity. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
Merry
Thank you so
Christmas,
much.
happy holidays, all that stuff.
Merry Christmas. Happy
Thank you.
holidays to everyone. Thank
All
you.
right.
Bye.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Was the most discussion we've ever had. That was awesome.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you know Jeff, but like Jeff's he's been a CEC for, I don't know, probably at least 7 years, maybe. And I first met him, I want to say Scrum Gathering San Diego, where Michael and I presented. And yeah, he's just such a thoughtful, insightful guy, and I definitely wanted to take advantage of knowing the insights that he has. So that was fortuitous, I think.
Yeah, really cool. No, I don't know, but he's come to quite a few of ours, hasn't he?
Yeah, and the last one he came to, I thought that he was in India, which is why I said, "Are you in North America now?"
Oh, I think I remember it. Like he was in India and you were asking him about like what, because he was sitting outside or something in the summer maybe or something. Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right, I'm starving.
I haven't had a break all day pretty much. So
Yeah.
I'm going to send
all.
Karen the chat so she can see these comments and stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, cool, Randy. Have a good night.
You too. Thanks.
See you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye. Good night.
Night.